Hello, and welcome to Mada Geopolitics. This is a quick update on the situation between Israel and Iran. I wanted to talk to you about what has happened already and what we expect to happen in the coming weeks, and what this means for risks in the aviation, shipping, energy, and other sectors. So, as I'm sure you've heard already, the Israelis launched a major campaign against Iran whereby they attacked a number of Iran's nuclear sites and a number of Iran's ballistic missile sites, as well as killing a number of the senior leaders of Iran, including in the military, including in the Islamic Revolution Guard Corps, and some nuclear scientists. This is obviously a very significant escalation with global and regional implications, and we're going to go over some of those right now. The first thing to keep in mind, I think, is that the attack was started with a strike from within Iran, targeting a wide number of Iran's radars and air defense capabilities. This was launched from civilian areas using civilian assets and is quite similar to the Ukrainian attack on Russia's strategic bombing fleet. This is a new way of doing war, essentially, whereby civilian assets, including just any kind of container, can be launched can be used to launch a number of drones that end up hitting very important strategic targets, and we can expect to see more of that globally going forward. Obviously, China is in an exceptional position to use this kind of tactic. Russia has some of its own container launched anti ship missiles. The Iranians themselves have some of that capability. So, this is a big change in risks. The airspace over the region is mostly shut, with pretty much all airlines avoiding the area. Countries like Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, where we are seeing the Royal Air Force, the US Air Force, and the French Air Force, as well as the Jordanians, participating in an effort to shoot down drones that are being fired from Iran. What is remarkable is that we haven't seen the Iranians launch tens or hundreds of ballistic missiles yet. We're not sure if this is the result of the decapitation strike or the result of the Israelis having succeeded in at least shutting down the tunnel entrances for some of Iran's underground missile bases. The Iranians, given how badly their air defense has been penetrated and how badly their air defense has also been hit with these drones that I mentioned, don't seem to have any air defense capability remaining. This makes it impossible for them to pursue this war successfully. And with the ballistic missile retaliation not having occurred already within several hours now, maybe 12, 14 hours since the strikes were initiated, it seems that there's been a major disruption to their ability to retaliate. The United States is saying that the strikes from the Israelis are going to continue, and there are mixed messages coming out of the White House. On the one side, they're claiming that they had no involvement in the attack in practical terms. On the other side, Trump is trying to use this in order to force the Iranians to come to the negotiating table and reach a new accord on their nuclear program. But it's become practically impossible for the Iranians to do this under the current regime. We've mentioned in our written reports in the past that the Islamic Revolution has failed, in that part of the project of the Islamic Revolution was to export their model to Iraq and Lebanon and Syria and Yemen. And while they succeeded in building some pretty significant militia capabilities in those countries, um, in Syria, the overthrow of Assad pretty much changed everything. In Lebanon, the destruction of most of Hezbollah's capabilities has also changed everything, and Hezbollah really has lost any ability to act as a deterrent against the Israelis. Yemen is firing drones and missiles, but really these are not having a significant effect other than causing some disruption to the aviation industry in Israel. So we see the Iranians as being very much on the back foot here. They don't know how the Israelis found the locations of some of their senior commanders. The Israelis are saying that they got some of Iran's Air Force commanders to have a meeting right before the strike and managed to eliminate a large number of them. This seems to have been a pretty successful decapitation strike. Let's talk a little bit about some of the sectors and what we expect to see. We'd said in the past that the Iranians have an economic nuclear option where they would shut down the Strait of Hormuz and try to target energy infrastructure in the Gulf. This has become a lot harder for them to do because if they were to try to approach the matter in this way, they would find themselves fighting against all of the Gulf Arab states who have been very quick to issue condemnation statements against Israel and publicly try to sound closer to Iran. Not just that, but pretty much every single energy facility in Iran, power, oil, what have you, all of its industries and all of its ports would then be targeted quite heavily in retaliation. So Iranian escalation in this arena doesn't make a lot of sense for the Iranians because the price that they would have to pay would be much, much higher. Um, if they were to try to do this to oil or to shipping. In the same way, when it comes to shipping, if the Iranians were to try to impose a naval blockade on shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, one of the results of that would be an American blockade against Iran itself. And it isn't clear that the Iranians want that or can handle with that. Already, the Iranian rial has gone from around 800,000 to the dollar to 900,000 to the dollar. This followed a big collapse earlier in the year where it reached more than a million. Um, the Iranians don't have the ability to maintain their economy in the face of a war with the United States. And given that their main deterrent and their main option was the ballistic missiles, and that these ballistic missiles have yet to begin arriving, we assume that their capabilities have been significantly weakened and that this is going to affect their willingness to use other capabilities that they have, including in the Strait of Hormuz. So this is somewhat positive for shipping, or at least nowhere near as bad as it could be. We expected the Iranians to be able to perform better, but they don't seem to understand where the intelligence penetration is and how the Israelis have this much information about their senior commanders. The supreme leader of Iran, Sayyid Ali Khamenei, has come out and appointed a number of new commanders to replace the ones who were killed. But this isn't exactly a job that they want to be doing if they don't understand where the Israelis are going to strike next and where the next Israeli blow is going to come from. The Iranians are really on the back foot. All they've done so far is fire some drones. These are being intercepted. These could be effective under some circumstances, but without support from the missile force, without demonstrating the ability to really exact a price on Israel through these ballistic missiles, this is an invitation for the Israelis to keep going. The other scenario related to the possibility of Iran developing a nuclear weapon in response to a strike. There's a couple of problems with that. First, the enrichment facilities at Fordo and Natanz are being attacked as we speak, with pretty steady Israeli airstrikes. It's very hard to actually try to develop a weapon under these circumstances and in this time frame when the Iranians also have no idea who's working for the other side, who's working to try to undermine the regime, who's spying for the Israelis or the Americans. It doesn't seem extremely plausible that they would succeed in doing this in short order. So for the next 2 weeks, it seems that the Israelis are going to be able to conduct regular strikes with the Iranians having very limited response capabilities. Moving to the impact on the region, in Iraq, rumors are that the leaders of the pro Iran militias are in hiding. We would have expected these militias to go after American interests quite severely and to try to attack Western personnel and Western assets in Iraq in order to help the Iranians in some way. This could still materialize, and we see an increased risk of terrorism in Iraq. But again, it's bad news, but it's not as bad as we thought it could have been, or as much as it could have been. Um, the psychological impact of seeing these leaders within Iran getting killed isn't going to encourage a lot of the Iraqi militias to risk their necks for Iran and to do something that um, kills the goose that lays the golden egg, which is, at the end of the day, Western investment. So their retaliation options are also limited there. When it comes to Syria and Lebanon, really, given the military capabilities that the Israelis have demonstrated, the next logical step for them is to claim even more territories in Lebanon and to try to expand their control in southern Lebanon, and to prevent the Shia from returning unless they are returning to work with Israel or for Israel in a way that the Israelis find acceptable. So, what this means is that the Lebanese Shia community is in a very difficult position. Not only did they lose the war against Israel, they're also in the process of losing their main regional patron. Um, if we sort of go back to Iran for a little bit and compare what's happening to Iran to what happened to Hezbollah, the Israelis pretty much took out the military leadership of Hezbollah, left the former secretary general of the group pretty much extremely isolated, and then went ahead and killed him before going on to destroy remaining Hezbollah capabilities, which is something that they're continuing to do right now with almost daily attacks in Lebanon. Um, we expect that the Israelis are going to pursue a similar strategy against Iran, whereby they keep the leadership sufficiently off balance and where they keep on attacking these giant missile cities that the Iranians have built underground with the objective of disabling at least their launch capabilities and perhaps fully taking them out, perhaps also conducting some special forces operations against the more challenging locations. And Israel is now in a better position to do this against both the missile bases and against the nuclear program because Iran has lost so much of its air defense capabilities. And then we expect the Israelis to try to kill Khamenei personally and a number of the senior clerics who are sitting in the Assembly of Experts, in the Expediency Council, in the Guardian Council, the kinds of clerics who would have the authority to perhaps succeed Khamenei, as well as probably trying to kill his son Mujtaba, who would also be a potential successor. The result of this on Iran is going to be effectively forced regime change. Um, we see conflict within the Iranian leadership over whether or not to pursue a nationalist limited project that focuses on Iran and its near abroad, or this imperialist expansionist project of the Islamic Revolution. We now expect the Islamic Revolution's defeat to be even more firmly confirmed. And as far as Lebanon goes, what this means is that the Shia will end up being an extremely well armed group, nowhere near well armed enough to take on Israel, or even perhaps to take on the new Sunni government in Syria. who have a score to settle with Hezbollah at the end of the day. So the Shia of Lebanon are in a very difficult position, and the choice that they have is either they accept a new reality or they have to fight. And we expect them to fight with limited aims, which means more instability in Beirut and in the south of Lebanon. We don't see them going up to the mountainous Christian areas. That's a very big challenge still. But we see some localized conflicts between them and their neighbors throughout Lebanon, unless somehow the state manages to assert itself against Hezbollah. And we see the new Secretary General doing his best to reach a compromise with the state. That's really been his preferred option so far, as well as making some incendiary, threatening statements against Israel and the state. We think now his position is extremely weak. So this could be stabilizing for Lebanon, especially if the different Lebanese groups try to accommodate the Shia in order to make sure that there isn't civil conflict. But that risk of civil conflict remains, and there's going to be a lot more pressure on Lebanon now to try to normalize ties with Israel or face the possibility of losing more territory to Israel, which itself becomes another problem. For Syria, they're doing everything that they can to avoid a conflict with Israel. But given the level of Israeli military power right now, we expect the Israelis to try to expand their influence in Syria even further in order to push the Turks back and to keep the Turks from becoming a threat to Israel again. When it comes to the Gulf states, these guys are doing everything that they can to not give Iran any excuse to target them or to target the American military bases in their territories. And again, for the Iranians, they're facing a pretty impossible choice. They know that the Israeli strike against them could not have happened without American support and acquiescence. There's a debate to be had over the role of the Trump administration, who were publicly warning Israel against an attack and saying that they were close to a deal. But at the end of the day, in terms of military realities, the Americans were certainly involved, regardless of what was happening at the political level. And this is where the problem for the Gulf states comes in. If the Iranians were to try to retaliate against the United States in the region, obviously this impacts the Gulf states, this impacts flights, this impacts shipping, this impacts energy. But again, as I've said before, it's a pretty disastrous situation for the Iranians in that if they were to use this pretext and justification to try to attack the United States in the region, it would only mean ever greater losses with no viable political or military aim that they could achieve realistically. So again, the Iranians are extremely stuck. Moving on to what it means for the rest of the world. Well, for the Russians and the Chinese, they have an interest in an Iran that does consume a big chunk of America's energy and that does keep America's focus on the Middle East. But it's not clear how they would go about pursuing that objective. If they were to try to deliver military capabilities to the Iranians, in particular, what's necessary now is air defense. This gets detected as it is deployed, and it's very difficult to set it up in an active war. The people who can do the most, really, given the geography, are the Russians, where they could go through the Caspian and deliver some air defense to the north to begin protecting Tehran, and then try to expand that. And it's conceivable that they would do that with Chinese help. But then, by the time these things are set up and installed, assuming that there are Iranian operators who can use these things, the Iranians would have lost a lot, and they would be really in no position to effectively retaliate unless they want an extremely long war. And again, in an extremely long war, with the Iranians trying to rebuild air defense, this simply invites more attacks on critical infrastructure and collapses the Iranian economy and collapses the currency and puts Iran in a much, much worse position. So we're really struggling to see what are the good options for Iran here. And it looks like there aren't any. Once their air defense was taken out, it's become pretty much a case of shooting fish in a barrel. Uh, when they try to set up new air defense, this is going to be detected from the air pretty quickly, and it's going to be hit again. It's not logistically feasible to simply deploy all of the different layers of air defense that are needed to protect the country the size of Iran in short order once the existing air defense infrastructure is taken out. So again, the Iranians are in a pretty grim position here. And when we see a situation, as I think we are likely to see, where the supreme leader gets killed or where a big number of the clerical establishment also get killed, it's difficult to see how the regime survives. And if you're in the senior echelons of the military, are you really going to rush to go to war for a regime run by an 85-year-old with no clear successor? Or are you going to try to make side deals and try to figure out arrangements that keep you alive to serve when a new regime comes in? This is a key question. Another thing to consider is the impact of this on Europe. If Iran becomes unstable, which is increasingly likely by the look of things, this is going to increase the volume of migrant flows into Europe. They're refugees when they get to Turkey, but then when they try to head to Europe, technically this is economic migration. Um, if we start seeing that, that ends up destabilizing European politics. And it's worth keeping in mind that the Iraqi state capability is quite low. So if there is serious instability in Iran, it can easily spill over into Iraq with some of these groups that have been associated with the IRGC instead turning to criminality and turning to violence to make sure that they have a place in the political system. So you see instability in Iraq, perhaps not immediately attacks against um, the key assets, the key energy assets in southern Iraq, although that's more possible now than it was last week, obviously. Um, but you also see the kind of pressure that destabilizes the Iraqi state and that leads to more migration towards the West, with a knock on effect when it comes to the risk of rioting in Europe, the level of stability in Europe. There was a story in Axios that claimed that a lot of the discussions between, or a lot of the public reporting on the discussions between Netanyahu and Trump, whereby Trump reportedly made it clear to Netanyahu that he didn't want a war with Iran, that this was intended to be merely theater, to deceive the Iranians, lull them into a false sense of security, and allow the execution of this kind of blow that we've just seen. Um, it's impossible for the Russians to read something like this and not conclude that the Americans are playing a similar game in Ukraine. This encourages the Russians to keep on going in Ukraine and discourages the prospects of a peaceful negotiation. But then one also has to ask, was it just the containers that we saw deployed against Russia's bombers that are present in Russia, or are there more surprises down the line that lead to an increased risk of escalation? We have to wonder about this because now that this new form of warfare that involves just using civilian assets to launch military drones is upon us. It's going to be upon us for a while, and it's going to change everything. It's not clear to me how you can have the kind of global trading system that exists right now when China could, for all we know, launch thousands of these drones on all kinds of American or NATO assets in a very, very short time, or Japanese or South Korean or Australian or whatever. This new form of warfare breaks down trust and makes compromises less likely and encourages autarky. But we're in this world now. It's not clear what the exit is. The last thing to mention is the effect that this has on China. The Chinese benefited significantly from the brief India Pakistan conflict because it demonstrated that Chinese technology is quite potent and quite effective, both in terms of air defense, although there were some gaps there, obviously, as well as in terms of aviation and air to air combat. Now we're seeing the Israelis knocking out air defense in a very cheap and effective way. And for the Chinese, this can't be that comfortable, given how many containers go into China every day. They're definitely not going to be especially happy about this. Um, One wonders if they are watching for the Americans to get bogged down in the Middle East in order to do something against Taiwan. But the sort of next thing to consider is, are the Americans getting bogged down in the Middle East? Because they're obviously not going to launch a ground campaign against Iran. That model ended with the Iraq War. The preferred American model since then has been to use local insurgent groups in order to pursue American objectives. We saw that done quite effectively in Libya and in Syria, especially. It didn't really work against Ansar Allah in Yemen, but we don't see a ground invasion, and we're not sure that the Americans are going to get bogged down, and that ends up becoming a concern for the Chinese. And the question that we have is, does it encourage them to go after Taiwan sooner, or does it actually deter them? We don't have a clear answer for that yet. Um, Briefly, this is what we wanted to say on the subject. I could quickly add that in terms of time frame, the Israelis are saying that this is going to take at least 2 weeks. That's perhaps a little bit optimistic given the size of Iran. We don't know if the Iranians will recover some ability to fight back. Hezbollah did in the it at one point show some recovery, and then it was hit quite severely again. I'm sure the Israelis are anticipating that, and I'm sure that American surveillance is all over Iran to try to deal with that possibility. But we expect 2 weeks to a month of this campaign continuing. And then the question becomes, what kind of regime do we end up with in Iran after this is all over? Um, Especially in the event of a decapitation against Khamenei himself, and especially in the event that a number of the key clerics in Iran also get taken out. Um, our view is that there is a will among at least some of the leadership of Iran to try to turn the country in a more nationalist direction and away from the Islamic Revolution. But they need some kind of leader for this to be credible. Could President Pezeshkian play this role? Maybe. Would that involve the return of the Shah? We find that a little more challenging. We find that a little more difficult. He's been away, or his son rather, has been away for too long, and it's not clear that he would be immediately welcomed in Iran. But we're definitely expecting either regime change or complete chaos in Iran. Um, this is something that ends up favoring, obviously, Turkey and Pakistan. It's worth spending a couple of minutes on Turkey here. Basically, the Turks are very honest in their ambition to take over northern Iraq and northern Syria. One big deterrent against Iraq has been the Iranians and not wanting to fight the Iranians directly or via proxy, I should say. With what looks like the beginning of the end for the Islamic Republic regime, this creates a bigger opportunity for Turkey, especially with the talks that are happening now to reconcile fully with the Kurds. So Turkey is benefiting from this, obviously, and I don't think this is making the Gulf Arab states particularly happy. If they find themselves with a choice between just Israel and Turkey, that's not exactly very comforting for them. They'd rather have Iran there in the mix in order to find a way to bolster their own influence and to have a few choices. Um, so this has been a really transformational thing that has happened in this in the last day. Um, we think again to reiterate that given that there hasn't been an Iranian response of significance so far, this suggests that Iran's military options are limited. This is all things considered, considering that we are in a war, relatively good news or better news than the possible alternative news for shipping and for energy and for the general safety of the Gulf states. Um, we're in the midst of a huge transformation. Within, by the end of the year, or even sooner, we could end up in a situation where there's no longer an Islamic Republic in Iran, with a choice between chaos or a new regime. So this is a very, very significant change. We're going to try to keep you updated about this. We had a bit of a technical issue, which I must apologize for. It seems that we've begun fixing it now. Monday, we should be able to invite you to a webinar where we would love to see you in person and to be able to answer your questions directly. But in the meantime, should you have any questions, please feel free to reply by email to this video. We've sorted out the emails now. I'm just sort of taking a glance at my phone, and it seems that we've sorted out the emails now. Really, that's the last thing that we wanted on on a day like today, but here we are to have a technical fault. Have a great weekend. I hope to be able to speak to you on Monday, and I hope to be able to deliver better news by then. Thank you very much, and please do keep in touch with us and let us know what topics you're interested in. Let us know if you like this new video format, by the way. It's the first time we try it. If you do like it, maybe we can do a few more of these. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend.